Hey guys, welcome. Thank you for taking the time to enjoy this video I'm putting together for you. Um, this is going to be the second video I'm making for my subscribers, you guys. This one probably will not be made public, so we'll keep it a little bit of a tight-knit crowd. And it also makes it easier for me to sort of plan out what I want to discuss and go over with you guys, because I don't have to, worrying about making it such like a feature-length thing that I'm gonna have to present. So this will be sort of a different style than the last video, but there are definitely some stuff that I wanna talk about today in today's video, and stuff that I hope that you guys will enjoy. We are now, I would say, we're right now we're into the 5th week of Deltascape Savage clearing, and that means we have 5 weeks of experience under our belts as players, and we're starting to sort of have a broader understanding of what Stormblood raiding is going to look like. The focus of this video today is going to mostly talk about the differences between tanking at the release of Stormblood and tanking 5 weeks into Deltascape Savage. Some of this is going to be influenced by the fact that there were some changes to tanks heading into Deltascape. They released the patch the day of Savage, and then other things are just us figuring out how to play better. Now, hopefully, this music in game is not too loud. I don't think it is. Yeah, I think it will be okay. So I'm just gonna keep this in-game music. Most of the stuff I'm just gonna be talking for most of this. We don't even leave this room. So, what music should we do this to? Let's do it to. This one's good. No, I don't like that one. Let's do. Wait, did it not go off? There we go. Alright, so now I'm a little more amped up for this. So, first things first. Let's go over some of the big changes to the 3 tanks that happened at the beginning of Deltascape. In the previous video we sort of went over the basics of how each tank is performing in Stormblood. So we don't need to revisit that. Let's just look at the changes that happened. I would say the biggest change to the 3 tanks leading into Savage was the change that they did to Warriors. I haven't even updated my Warriors gear set in a while. They finally addressed the issue of the stance swapping being a complete annoyance and detriment to the class, and they have essentially just removed it altogether, the penalty altogether. There's no longer a penalty for swapping stances between Deliverance and Defiance, and this sort of breathed new life into the class, heading right into Savage. Now, many players who were focused on Dark Knight and Paladin before this change, a lot of the Warriors were turned off to Warrior heading into Savage because of the penalty for stance swapping. Many of those players did not find themselves going back to Warrior right away just because of how strong Dark Knight and Paladin still were, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But Warrior itself did have a lot going for it starting the tier off with that change. I think that what they did was wise. I did not expect them to even go to the links that they did. I actually anticipated that they were still going to put a penalty on it, but that the penalty may be a static cost of like 20 to swap stances. That's what I was personally expecting, but I was shell-shocked, but completely okay with the fact that they just removed the penalty altogether. Another great change that they did was they removed the cost of IR and Unchained. They removed the previous cost of 20, and now the ability costs 0 to use. The only factor of being able to use this ability is just the cooldown now. There's no gauge cost or anything, which definitely makes the rotation a bit more flexible, which was Warriors. If you guys will remember, if you saw my last subscriber video I did, One of my biggest complaints about Warrior was its lack of flexibility in Stormblood versus the two previous iterations of the game. Warrior's strengths in Strong Suit has always been its flexibility compared to the other two tanks, and I felt that they really gutted Warrior's flexibility in Stormblood, especially once I got my hands on it myself when the game actually went live. So the fact that they removed the cost of 20, basically what that means is that your IR Berserk window is now a bit more flexible than it was beforehand. I don't remember off the top of my head, and I can't remember off the top of my head the minimum value that you need to actually execute it fully with the the full 6-cleave upheaval. But how does the removal of the cost of 20 improve Warrior's flexibility? Well, just to clarify what I'm saying, is that your bar, say you have a trick attack coming up, your ninja and your party, like their buff synergies are coming up in like 10 seconds, and you're basically locked in and restricted to the confines of where your beast gauge is at. If you don't have enough bar to properly, follow up that call with like a full IR, full max spell cleaves upheaval that you can output inside those buff windows, it's a real nuisance for either you if you have to just do a nerfed IR with less cleaves, or for them if you have to tell them to wait 3 GCDs or 4 GCDs, for you to build up more bar. They're a lot more flexible in the fact that they can maybe spend that onslaught 20 seconds prior. They don't have to worry about that 20 rage that they just lost. It was definitely a good thing to make it not require the full 100 gauge or 90 gauge that you were using beforehand to sort of get through that stars aligning combo of combining the max IR with the full buff synergies of trick attack and litany and your berserk and your potion, all that jazz. So definitely plus points for flexibility to the Warrior. In terms of abilities like Shake It Off and the fact that IR and Unchained still share a cooldown, we still view those as big negatives. These are two things that have not been addressed yet. I don't know if the latter will ever be addressed. We do know that Shake It Off is being reevaluated for 4.1, so we can look forward to that. That was pretty much it for the Warrior. Oh, we did also see a Storm's Path potency buff. This was a bit shocking to me. I wasn't expecting this. I was actually expecting the opposite. I was expecting them to sort of empower the other two in Storm's Eye and Butcher's Block. I was expecting them to kind of make those cost 20 or generate 20 gauge in addition to Path, because I feel like Warrior more so than ever is all about just pressing Path as much as you can, and I thought that was kind of an uninteresting playstyle personally, but they went this route. That's fine. They really want to encourage. Keep encouraging us to press Path, and they really want us only pressing Butcher's Block when we care about threat. So that's fine. Just not what I was expecting. I think that was it for Warrior. I don't have notes in front of me on hand. This is very like off the cuff. This is a very relaxed sort of video that I'm doing. So I believe that was it for Warrior. If I forget anything, maybe I'll leave an annotation or something on any of these classes. If I forget something, maybe I'll leave an annotation on YouTube. Okay, so let's look at the next of the three. Let's look at Paladin. Update the skier set. So Paladin, heading into Deltascape Savage, was in a really strong spot. It was head and shoulders above the other two tanks in terms of its raid prowess, in terms of its viability as the top tank, and it was a bit concerning to certain players. We saw many career warriors switching over to Paladin when Stormblood came about. In Heaven's Word, Warrior was pretty much a staple. In Stormblood, it was starting to look like the Paladin was going to be the staple, and this was it was a bit of a turnoff for some, but others, it was a breath of fresh air. So Square Enix sort of understood that this dynamic was happening, and Paladin actually, because of this, did receive a few nerfs going into Deltascape Savage, and I think that they were justified. One of the biggest nerfs I think that the class got, if not the only nerf off the top of my head, is the Holy Spirit potency reduction. I believe Holy Spirit was 420 before the nerf, potentially 440, but I want to say 420, and now it's down to 400. So we saw a bit of a potency nerf there. We also saw, what else did we see? I feel like there was something else. It's been so long. I can't remember off the top of my head. But the TLDR basically is the Paladins went into Deltascape doing a bit less damage than they were doing in the prior 2 weeks, or 4 weeks, I guess. Did this change Paladin's viability at all? The short in Savage. Short answer was no. Paladin is still one of the premier progression tanking options for, you know, it's the fact that abilities like Intervention, Sheltron, Cover, and Passage of Arms, all 4 of those are massive playmaking abilities that can bolster your progression and your progression strategies. Particularly Passage of Arms and Sheltron, I think those are probably the 2 biggest ones. Intervention and Cover are strong in their own right, but I think the ones that impacted progression the most were Passage of Arms and Sheltron. If you think about how Sheltron functioned in Savage, we can talk about this a bit more once we get to like some of the fight-specific details. But a lot of progression, and especially this tier with how low the tier was tuned. This tier was tuned for a very low item level of gear requirement, and because of that, the damage incoming on your tanks is going to be a bit lower than you might expect from previous tiers, and you were really fishing for as much sword oath uptime as you could. As a result, the damage was not threatening. There was really not a lot of shield oath requirements. The fact that Shirk has been added to the game in Stormblood has sort of removed the necessity of even using threat combos and threat stances on tank swaps even. You know, Shirk kind of carries those entirely. You can do most of a fight in Sword Oath or Gritless or Defiance or Deliverance. There's not a lot of necessity to be in your tank stance this tier. And because of that, and a ridiculously strong ability like Sheltron is going to see a lot of use. You know, the fact that Sheltron now also covers magic is incredible. And there are so many magic tank busters this tier that Paladin can just handle in Sword Oath at the cost of nothing but 50 gauge. And this thing has like I actually thought it was 10-second cooldown. That's funny. I just see that it's 5 seconds. I remember it's 5 seconds, right? Yeah, it's a 5-second CD ability that is as strong as Sheltron is, you know, at the cost of only 50 gauge, when tank busters are so infrequent that you're not going to need it by the time you get to the next time you need, or even by the next time you have 50 gauge. It was incredibly powerful this tier. The Sword Oath uptime was ridiculously high, if not 100% at times. I think that very few moments in progression, I can think of maybe like 1 or 2 moments in 04 Savage, and maybe picking up the ad or ads in 03 Savage. Like, those are the only times where I would probably really consider Shield Oath. So ability like Sheltron was really powerful. Passage of Arms saw a ton of play because there was so much magic AoE and just raid damage, not controlled, but mitigatable raid damage this tier. You have Roars in 01. You have in 02 you have, you know, the big stomp that it does in the middle of the room when it sends your 4 party players flying who are up in the air. You have you know, the gravitational waves that are in that fight. In 03 you have all of the I can't remember the ability, but the big raid AoE attack that the boss does. I can't remember the name of the ability right. It's like Dimensional Wave or something. That might be it. none of those really require passage of arms. But then you have probably the biggest applications for it in 04. 04, where people were just learning the first battle with Exdeath, not Neo Exdeath, but when people were first learning Exdeath himself. The meteors being mitigatable by passage of arms was really powerful. The fact that the paladin could use a passage of arms to block the thunder cast, and then also keep channeling it to you, because of 360 blocking. A paladin, so say, this will be kind of fun, use a marker for this. Say A is Exdeath. What we actually had Leroy do was Thunder is casting. This is before the meteor. Thunder is casting. Because he has 360 blocking, he can block the thunder like this, and he also, if A is Exdeath, he has his back to the party, so Passage of Arms is now mitigating the meteor on the party standing directly behind Exdeath. So this was really cool, and an easy way to mitigate both thunder and meteor at the same time from one single class. Stuff like that was really strong. Obviously not acquired, but just strong. Can save a pull or make you allow you to use mitigation elsewhere. And then probably the two biggest applications of Passage of Arms this entire tier came in Neo Exdeath for the two skills Almagest and the burn during the Neverwhere phase at the end with the Frenzied Fists and Frenzied Spheres. The high stack Frenzied Fists with Frenzied Sphere combination, like once you get like 12 plus stacks at the end there, channeling a Passage of Arms when you're going for your first clear or something, and your White Mage's mana is much lower, or MP, sorry. White Mage's MP is much lower than he would really like, and you are having trouble keeping up. Channeling that Passage of Arms for those last 2 to 3 cycles of Frenzied Fists can potentially save you a kill. So a really powerful skill list here, and that's just 2 of their big 4. Cover and intervention. Because this tier, with the exception of 03 and 02, can largely be handled entirely by one tank. 01 can be handled entirely by one tank. So having intervention, just dumping an intervention on your co-tank and rolling your CDs appropriately to help bolster him for whatever tail slaps or twin lightnings, whatever you want to mitigate. Stuff like that was really strong. Having intervention for any time there was a evil, I can't remember the name of the attack in 02, I feel like it was Evil Sphere. There's so many things, so many applications for intervention that you can use in your co-tank. The same thing goes for Dark Knight with Blackest Night, that we'll get to in a minute. Cover did not see too much use during Prog. I think that the biggest applications of cover this tier showed in 04. The fact that 04 is a constant battle of threat between you and your White Mage. Because there's so many threat resets throughout the fight that you're pretty much always fighting either your White Mage or a Samurai or a Monk for threat. And being able to cover a White Mage who took aggro on an Arrow 3 either accidentally or by design was just really strong, and just a higher quality of life than groups that didn't have a Paladin. One strategy that most teams are using right now in 04 is if you time a cover on the Arrow 3 that follows the Grand Cross Delta, the Arrow 3 Earthshaker combination there, if you cover during about 70% of the cast bar of the Arrow 3, the cover on the White Mage actually lasts all the way to the Earthshaker, and because the White Mage is typically going to be highest on threat because of the Almagest healing there, he'll take not only the Arrow 3 but also one of the Earthshaker ticks, so your Paladin doesn't even need to provoke or worry about threat combos at all. He can just cover, and the co-tank just vokes off of the White Mage, so the co-tank and the White Mage are 1 and 2 on threat, and they take the Earthshakers, and the White Mage just gets covered. It's just a really high quality of life, and definitely optimal for your Paladin's DPS, because you don't have to worry about doing any Halones or anything. So yeah, just a ton of applications for the Paladin's toolkit this tier, and their damage is still really strong. The Holy Spirit nerf didn't get their damage, didn't make them so abysmal that they somehow can't make enrages or compete for enrages. No, they're still ridiculously strong, and Fight or Flight and Requiescat at windows are still really strong. I think as a general overview of the change of Paladin leading up to Savage. I think that we'll leave it there for now. We sort of got into some of the specifics of their big four abilities, but let's leave it as a general statement for now. We'll move on to Dark Knight. So Dark Knight is the class that I have the most experience with currently, which is funny because if you recall in my last video, Dark Knight was the class that I had the least experience with. But I decided shortly before Savage came out that Dark Knight was, because Leroy, my co-tank, was already playing a Paladin, that I was going to be most interested in playing Dark Knight alongside his Paladin. I felt that it was going to contribute more to our raid and our raid style. And this is mostly due to two things. Firstly, the obvious of that being that the warrior was in such an inflexible state that it was just annoying for teams to have to play with during Prog. Instead of you as a co-tank being there to support your Paladin, your King Paladin, because Paladins were gods leading up to Deltascape. Instead of you supporting the God class was having to support and cater to you, the inferior warrior. So it really just did not make sense from a progression standpoint. You should be bolstering and supporting the stronger classes as much as you can. And a Dark Knight did that much better than a warrior did. You really had to cater to a warrior's lack of flexibility for tank swaps and CDs and just everything. So I much preferred for Dark Knight. And also, second to this, after we saw the normal mode play out, I just saw that this tier that we were heading into was going to be a predominantly magic tank buster tier, and any tier that is favoring magic tank busters, Dark Knight and these days Paladin with Sheltron, are going to reign supreme. Dark Knight is a 60-second CD God mode ability versus any magic attack. It's not really God mode, 15 to 30%, but it's still really strong. And there were no tank busters that occurred so frequently that this ability didn't just carry. Dark Knight is just extremely strong for mitigating Deltascape, and we were able to identify that through the normal modes, and that's why I made the decision to go with Dark Knight. So, looking at what changed heading into Deltascape. We had, what did we have? We had a potency buff to, I believe, Soul Eater. Yes, I believe they buffed Soul Eater by I want to say 20. Yes, I believe it got a 20 potency buff because I feel like it did 420 potency. It might have been Soul Eater that was previously 420 and Holy Spirit was previously 440. That might have been what it was. But regardless, Soul Eater I believe was 420 with the Dark Arts 420 before. Now it's 440. So a nice potency buff there. And we also saw a potency buff on Blood Spiller, if I recall. And I can't remember the exact quantity that was buffed by off the top of my head. But I do remember them buffing Blood Spiller a little bit. Blood Spiller was quite what I would deem weak heading into Deltascape, so I thought that was a necessary change, completely expected. In terms of its performance as a co-tank, alongside a Paladin, most of the time I felt that it was putting the group in a stronger spot to be having the Dark Knight tanking as much as possible. And this is easily accomplished on fights like 01 and to a lesser extent I won't even say Xdeath. I was going to say Xdeath, but Xdeath can kind of go either way. Neo Xdeath, rather. But definitely 01, I felt that a Dark Knight was definitely the way to go for pulling the boss. One thing that's really strong about Dark Knight is the fact that they can do a gridded Dark Arts Power Slash as its third GCD on a pull. I think it's fourth if you count Unmend. And be punished less by that than a Paladin who is forced to do a Halone combo. A Paladin doing a Halone is really putting his Requiescat and Fight or Flight windows behind and in a much more negative spot than a Dark Knight would be in putting his Delirium Blood Weapon combo behind and window behind. there's that this is mostly, just to give you an idea of why that is, this is mostly due to just how trick attack timings unfold and like where your blood spillers end up landing, where your dark arts carbon spits end up landing. Things just kind of lined up better when we had the Dark Knight pull. It's the best way I can explain it. So if you're listening to this and you're running a Paladin Dark Knight combination or even a Warrior Dark Knight combination, definitely experiment with Dark Knight pulling. I also know that I do kind of like Warrior pulling as well. I just personally don't prefer Paladin pulling if the Paladin's first 3 GCDs are forced to be shield oathed. And typically in Prog they are. When you're doing a non-shield oath pull in like a speed kill with Shadewalkers and Shirks, Shirks that are able to be used like on the pull instead of saving them for a later mechanic. If you're doing it in that kind of setting, you can get away with not having to do shield oath on a pull, and in those scenarios, Paladin pulling I have less of an issue with, I even like it in most scenarios. But in a progression setting, where you can't really afford to be blowing Shirks in the first 20 seconds of a fight because you need them for later mechanic, I definitely prefer the Dark Arts Power Slash on the pull. Blackest Night saw a ton of application this tier. Dark Knight saw a ton of application this tier. One thing that I would highly recommend for any Dark Knight listening, this Blackest Night macro is the greatest thing you can make this tier and for future Stormblood tiers. This is an all-in-one button. Well, actually, I should specify, you should have 2 Blackest Night binds. You should have a self Blackest Night, which is just no macro at all. This is just a cast Blackest Night on yourself, or it's on your target, but if you're targeting an enemy, it would cast it on yourself. This is because when you're looking to require Blackest Night for mitigation, you don't want to be fumbling around with a macro that's not really responsive. You want Blackest Night activating as quickly and as reliably as possible. Now, when you want to Blackest Night another party member or even your co-tank, I use this macro. You'll notice that there's a bunch of lines repeated. We do this. This is just something that a handful of people have been doing to sort of. It feels like the macro is a bit more responsive when there's those repeated lines there. It might just be superstition, but it definitely feels a bit more responsive when I have the repeated lines there. What this macro is basically doing is if I don't have anything moused over in terms of like a target or what have you, it will Blackest Night my co-tank, and it'll be the second player in my party list. And if I do want to Blackest Night a different party member other than my co-tank, say like a white mage who has a vulnerability, and AoE's coming, and my white mage has a vulnerability, and he's not really able to mitigate it, hover over him, throw Blackest Night on him. That happened a lot during Prog. This macro is one of my most used macros on Dark Knight right now, and I highly recommend it. But I also highly recommend having a separate bind for a self Blackest Night that is not macroed at all. And again, I do this with all my macros, repeated lines, Soul Survivors, Salted Earths. I like to target Salted Earth, and another instance where I have 2 binds for the same ability. I have a targeted Salted Earth that sends a Salted Earth at my target, and then I would also have a Salted Earth bind separately for just a normal Salted Earth that places the ground marker if I need like some very precise placements. Speaking about Blackest Night specifically this tier, there's really not a lot to argue against just using it on your co-tank as much as possible. Anytime that your co-tank is tanking and they're eating a tank buster, be it an Arrow 3 or an Evil Sphere or tail slaps on 01, anything they're dealing with, a critical hit, just throw a Blackest Night on them. You're gonna come out even at worst, and in some scenarios, during like buff windows, you're gonna come out ahead getting that extra blood spiller. So use it basically anytime that you're guaranteed that your co-tank can pop the shield, and also where it's gonna benefit the co-tank's mitigation. I find it's my most pressed macro during a fight. So ton of use during Prog. It was definitely one of the big key arguments for taking Dark Knight over Warrior. Warrior doesn't really offer anything in terms of party utility, whereas Dark Knight, Blackest Night has actually saved pulls, or maybe not saved pulls, but it has saved lives. It has avoided deaths that may have happened for players in the party, and that's just something a Warrior could not do during Prog. And in Prog, you're going to have people screwing up. You're going to have people taking extra vulnerability stacks or getting low and needing raises, and then not being able to get topped off after a raise before a mechanic. Blackest Night is going to be one of the strongest abilities throughout Stormblood if it remains the same way it is right now, and unless Warrior gets some added utility. I don't anticipate myself playing anything different than Dark Knight in progression tiers to come. Now, if we think about what a Dark Knight's responsibility should be in a fight, we sort of already highlighted maybe some of its strength on a pull, but outside of a pull, how should you be looking to use a Dark Knight versus, say, a Paladin? One thing that I think is nice about Dark Knight is the obvious of the Dark Knight's AoE strength is going to crush a Paladin's AoE strength. And I'm specifically thinking of the scenario in 03 where you have the large group of ninjas spawn and then you also have the big Iron Giant. Utilizing your Dark Knight and your Dark Knight's ability to grit blood price that pack of mobs before they either get AoE'd or burned down, before they get LB'd or AoE'd, burned down, whichever you're doing, utilizing your Dark Knight as much as you can there, and utilizing the Dark Knight's AoE and the Dark Knight's ability to tank large packs of mobs and generate massive amounts of MP through blood price. Utilizing that is going to be something that you definitely want to look into. And if you have a bunch of blood gauge already, utilizing blood weapon Quietus is going to be really strong. That's the other thing that I knew there was something else. The change to Quietus was incredible. Oh, one of my favorite things about Dark Knight. So I knew there was something else. The Quietus buff, what it essentially did is it now on attack, Quietus generates additional MP. You don't just need blood weapon for it to generate an MP now. You can also double dip with blood weapon on Quietus and generate MP from blood weapon and from Quietus. Quietus, in terms of gauge generation through blood weapon and MP generation just through itself, incredibly powerful. I find myself using Quietus even on 2 targets alone. I think of a scenario in 04 where you have the meteor that spawns directly next to Neo X Death. Typically, you're going to get a Quietus or a Blood Spoiler around that point. I find myself pretty much always doing a Quietus Dark Passenger on those two, on that cleave of 2. Just such a strong buff for Dark Knight AoE when Dark Knight was already the king of tank AoE. Definitely further solidifying its niche as the king of that. Utilize it as much as you can. Quietus as much as you can. Blood price whenever you can't utilize blood weapon to its full strength. And outside of that, we talked about the obvious Dark Mind strength earlier. Anytime you have magic Tampesters, utilize Dark Mind as much as you can. I think about Arrow 3s on Neo X Death. It's really strong to have assuming you have Dark Mind for every Arrow 3 that you're taking. Dark Knight is a really strong option for taking the Arrow 3s. Paladin is an equally fine option for taking it with Sheltrons. I know that a lot of teams just kind of have their Paladin do it because having their Paladin hold aggro throughout the fight just sort of makes lots of other things easier as well. Having your Paladin hold the boss for double attacks means that the Paladin can HG the double attacks if they want. But you can also make the argument of having your Dark Knight hold the boss for delta attacks means that the Dark Knight can Living Dead the delta attacks without having to worry about a take swap there. Either way, both Paladin and Dark Knight, fantastic at taking Arrow 3s. One class that's not fantastic at taking Arrow 3s is Warrior. So if you're playing a Warrior right now, I would recommend probably giving it to your Paladin or Dark Knight for handling the Arrow 3s. Warrior can survive every single Arrow 3 that the boss throws at you. It's just that it's going to require maybe either a bit more shielding or a bit more gear, I would say. Really the only options they have for dealing with the Arrow 3 are Thrill of Battle or Vengeance, unless you want to start throwing in some IBs, but that would require stance swapping. I can count the number of times in one hand during Neo X Death progression where it was like, oh shit, I messed up my cooldowns, I need to grit or I need to shield out this Arrow 3. Okay, 2 hands. We'll say 2 hands. I can count on 2 hands the number of times that happen. I also think that just being able to toggle with shield through toggle and grit is more flexible than having your warrior
require 50 gauge for a Panic IV. Obviously, the Warrior Defiance being off the GCD is quite flexible, but I mean, you can be at any bar, assuming you have 1800 MP, that's the only requirement. I can be at any point in my rotation with any amount of meter, and oh shit, I only have a Blackest Night for this Tank Buster. Well, I can just toggle grit. I've only cost myself 1800 MP and 1 GCD, and I've now survived without any extra cooldown. So I do think that toggled abilities like Grit and Shield Oath are really strong for progression, where you don't always have your CDs in the perfect place that you want. So yeah, if you're aware and progressing, personally, I would buy for giving threat to the Dark Knight or the Paladin as much as possible for taking Arrow 3s. Warrior, completely fine for clearing the fight, and completely fine for taking the Arrow 3s. I just think it's easier as a Paladin or a Dark Knight. So, we sort of brushed over the changes heading into the Savage, some of the strengths on some of these new abilities and the changes to the abilities. Let's talk about some more general tanking specifics. And one thing that I definitely wanted to do in this video is do something I didn't do in the last video, and that's talk about cross-roll abilities, which I guess are not even... Yeah, you can still call them cross-roll abilities. They're roll abilities now, but we need to highlight which one of these should be used and where should they be used. I think that's one thing that definitely needs to happen in our post-Deltascape analysis. And one thing that you're going to find is that this guy right here sees a ton of use this tier, and this guy right here does not see a ton of use this tier. I think that potentially you can make the argument that on a fight like 01 or even 02, awareness is less of a strength, and definitely on Neo Exeth, awareness is going to be, pretty much not even used because there's no auto text in Neo Exeth. But on Exeth, I do like awareness a lot. On 01, you can probably get away with taking off awareness and just running Convalescence to be able to better handle those times where you're Sword Oath or Gritless or in Deliverance and not really rolling any CDs. There is a lot of auto attack damage in 01 and 02 as well. There's a lot of movement in those fights. Maybe not a lot of movement, but there is movement, and during those periods of movement, if you don't want to roll a CD, rolling a Convalescence there can sometimes just suffice. Getting a Convalescence taught on you can sometimes just be the difference. So I could see an argument for 01 and 02 and on Exeth. For 03 and for Neo, for Neo Exeth. For 03 and for Exeth, Little Exeth, I would definitely favor awareness. Abilities that you're never going to touch and never going to take off: Provoke, Rampart, Reprisal, and Shirk. Reprisal was so strong this tier. Like I said earlier, there's so many instances of large raid AoE damage where Reprisal is just that extra push of, maybe not requiring that extra GCD of mitigation or extra resource used from a party member. I think of abilities like in Exeth and Neo Exeth. You have Meteor and Almagast. Oh my god, this thing is so good for Almagast. Please, 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 if you're a tank progressing on Neo Exeth or just clearing Neo Exeth and you don't Reprisal every Almagast, please start doing so. It is up for every Almagast and it is incredibly powerful. You need to use it before the cast bar finishes as a damage snapshot. Where else is it really strong? It's really strong in 03 on the we call them the Protean waves. It's the mechanic that behaves very similar to the A3 Protean wave, where the boss jumps and then it shoots the 8 lines at your party members and you surround the boss. I can't remember the name of the actual mechanic, but reprisaling that and also reprising the, I believe they're called the dimensional waves. You're coordinating with your tank, with your co-tank of who wants to reprisal what and when. You can pretty much have a reprisal for every single one of those scenarios. So definitely work that out. On Exeth, obviously catch the meteors. Reprisaling the fire 3s that go out. Nice, a little bit nice of a boost to help your healers be able to top before the white hole. In O1, Reprisaling, I actually really like Reprisaling the tail slaps. Having one tank, get tail slaps, and another one handling like the roars and stuff. I find that works really well. In O2, you're mostly just concerned with the gravitational waves. I think that's what the big AoE is called. And you and your co-tank can rotate reprisals for those if need be. But you can also throw a reprisal on the stomp that he does in the center of the room that knocks that you split as a party of 8. But I really don't find it necessary. I feel like that mechanic solves itself so long as you do the mechanic properly and stack with 8 players. I don't really feel it's a necessary reprisal there. And also because there's really no follow-up tank damage immediately after that. You have I guess there is some follow-up damage, but it's not like instantaneous, and it's not concurrent to that. That's the biggest thing. It's not happening concurrently while he's channeling that ability. So yeah, I would probably prioritize the dimension for the gravitational waves if you had to pick one. Shirk for me is a staple just because of its not just for tank swaps, but just the fact that it advances your tank's threat agenda. You're advancing the threat agenda without having to be swapping to tank stances and doing threat combos. I think this is just an ability that increases a tank's DPS. It really that's what it does. Oh, I just leave everything, but not having to do those threat combos because of this ability right here is just really important on every single fight. And obviously on fights like O3, O3 and X-Death were the ones where I said awareness was good. On those fights, having a shirk for every single tank swap that you're doing is going to be really important because you don't want to be requiring threat combos while you're tank swapping. On O3, the reason we highlight awareness, if you're unaware, is the big tank buster in O3 is called critical hit, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a critical hit that can be stopped by awareness. If you awareness, the damage will be cut down by 40%, and that's really strong. That is better than a Shadow Wall. Shadow Wall is 30%. Awareness is essentially a 40% damage reduction because you're removing that critical hit aspect of it. So I personally think awareness is non-negotiable, and I would also encourage, even though I know that there are groups out there that are not tank swapping O3 just because you can do it with a tank and you don't need awareness for every single critical hit, I encourage you just because of the fact that tank swapping costs you literally nothing. You don't need to even enter tank stances or do threat combos. I encourage you to tank swap for every single critical hit so you can have an awareness going for every single critical hit. You need to tank swap to have an awareness for every single one because it does not come off cooldown for one tank in time. So I personally don't understand why these groups don't tank swap O3. It makes absolutely no sense. It costs you literally nothing. All you have to do is press provoke and then say shirk me now, and your other tank presses shirk. That's it. That's all you have to do. It also just advances your threat every time you do so. So strongly encourage that. On X-Death, I just like awareness because I'm fucking tired of having random X-Death auto attacks that crit me and just kill me when they shouldn't. So that's the reason for that. I don't feel that convalescence is necessary. Maybe a warrior or something can run convalescence on that fight for like convalescence deploy or something, but I don't feel that's necessary personally. And I feel that convalescence would probably see a bit more play on a warrior than any of the other two tanks. Either of the other two tanks, rather. Does that cover everything I want to talk about for the roles? No. So one additional... I don't particularly care for anticipation in raiding very much. I think the anticipation... Excuse me. I think the anticipation is strong in dungeons. However, I would probably replace... Yeah, I would probably replace Shirk in dungeons for anticipation. Potentially even Reprisal if necessary. I don't think Reprisal is very useful in dungeons either. But one ability that does not get used like pretty much ever until O3 is the cross roll ability of the silence. This is the old like spirits within that sorry, my brain right now. Sorry guys. This is the thing that was only available to paladins prior to Stormblood. Thank you, jeez, I don't know why that was so hard to say. Paladins were the only tank of the three that had access to a silence. Now every tank has access to this. You should take a silence to O3 if you're getting the ads
I know that speed kills right now are skipping the ads, but if you're progging O3 and you're getting the ads being the Iron Giant and the ninjas, use Interject to silence the ability from the Iron Giant. I believe it's called Overheat. You can silence that, and it's going to reduce damage a lot. One of your tanks, it probably makes most sense to be the tank that's tanking the Iron Giant should take Interject. And if they need to drop something for it, I would not drop Awareness. I would most likely drop... let's take a look here. I would most likely be the tank that drops Reprisal. I think that you would probably just run one Reprisal in that scenario. During a speed kill, you're not going to need Interject because you're not going to see that Iron Giant, but during Prog, you are probably going to want this. You can have other party members silence it if necessary. I just think it's easiest for the tank to do it. I know that Bards can silence, and even Monks. There's lots of options. I just feel that it's easiest and most accessible for a tank to do it. I think that covers everything about the cross rules. I said that I don't really care for Anticipation very much. Ultimatum is an ability that has not come into play yet in raiding. I went into this in large detail on one of the streams I did, but this ability is not going to see use until we see one of two scenarios. A fight where a single provoke is not enough. The cooldown of 40 seconds is not enough. You need to be provoking at such a more frequent rate that you need access to 2 provokes, and that's where one instance of Ultimatum is going to find strength. The second is when you have a sort of council style encounter where you're doing tank swaps that include multiple mobs. Say you're tanking like 2 mobs and they're putting different types of vulnerabilities on a tank, and you need to get both of those mobs off him before the next stack of vulnerabilities. Like, that's when you'd have an ultimatum to taunt both of them and do like this never before seen in 14 2 mob tank swap off of a single tank. We haven't seen a fight that has that kind of dynamic yet, but it's possible that they could design. Ultimatum is in the game for a reason. They clearly have an idea of where they want to use it. So we'll see how they end up. What kind of encounter style they put into the game to warrant us taking this ability. Because right now I think it's pretty fucking garbage. I think it's really bad for the content we have. So I think that covers. We haven't seen a need for low blow really yet. I don't think the Iron Giant is stunnable. If the Iron Giant is stunnable, this is also an option, but I feel like it's potentially just easier just to take the Interject. I don't see a need to take low blow right now. I think that covers the cross roll ability stuff. I think let's try to wrap this up here with a sort of, I guess, overview on the tanking combinations, because I think this is going to be one of probably the most debated things heading into the weeks of farm that we're heading into. We're finding out that despite Warrior's sort of lack of ability to handle magic mitigation well compared to the other 2 tanks, Warrior does a lot of fucking damage. And in the speed kill / farm environment, you're potentially on fights like Neo Exdeath going to be seeing combinations of Dark Knight Warrior just for damage alone, or Paladin Warrior. Even either of those 2 comps are going to be really strong for farm and for speed kills. I'm actually really interested in Dark Knight Warriors, particularly myself, and I'm definitely going to be getting back into playing Warrior once I get a 345 axe. Right now we're in the 5th week, so I've got 5 books, and I haven't got a coffer yet. So. Once I get that axe, though, I'm definitely going to be experimenting a lot more with Warrior for speed kills and whatnot. I think one of Warrior's strengths outside of its physical mitigation, it's definitely strong in fights like O3 right now for physical mitigation. But in addition to its physical mitigation strengths, it's definitely really strong in terms of damage. The IR berserked windows and syncing them up with trick attacks and battle indies and hypercharges and battle voices, like, Warrior gets really strong under all those, and Dark Knight really can't match that level of cooldown strength. Delirium Blood Weapon is great, and under an infusion pot it's fantastic, but it's not going to compete with an IR Berserk. It's just not, and it's not meant to. It's not how the class is designed. Dark Knight's sort of this sustained DPS, whereas Warrior right now is very much the spike DPS. That being said, fitting Blackest Knights into trick attack windows as much as you can as a Dark Knight, and using the Blackest Knights at those points to get your Blood Spillers in at times where you can fit an extra Blood Spiller under a buff window, that's where Dark Knight's like high level play is headed, and it's already there. To be honest, it's been there since Deltascape came out. Uh, you know, using Delirium and Blackest Night in a way that makes it so that your gauge and your blood spillers fall under all of those party buffs is what high level Dark Knight play is all about currently. And that's where the top Dark Knights are starting to separate themselves from the sort of less experienced ones. And it's definitely one of the things I'm trying to work on a lot right now to master. I know that a lot of my openers and fights are different because, like, in certain areas of a fight, I can pop a Blackest Night, and in certain areas I can't. So using Blackest Night those areas to get the blood spillers that I'm able to under those buffs is going to be really important. As far as Paladin goes, Paladin's a lot more linear in this aspect. Yeah, you only have two windows. You have the fight or flight window and you have the Requiescat window. What you want to worry about for Paladin is making sure your Requiescat window doesn't go into a area where it's going to be impeded. And by that I mean, like, you want to get the full value of every Requiescat window, because Requiescat is a window that doesn't allow for high mobility. So using it in areas where your mobility is not going to be interrupted is obviously important. But the one thing that doesn't get talked about as much is, what is the strength of a fight or flight window? Well, the strength of it in reality is the double Goring Blade. It's the double Goring Blade Circle of Scorn. And in a fight like this, is something that I was talking about with a friend the other day. In a fight like Neo X-Death, choosing where your fight or flight window lies on your opener is pretty important, because Neo X-Death actually doesn't take damage while he's disappeared and teleporting around the map. He doesn't take damage while he's phased out and invisible. And if you do like a fight or flight opener second, what's going to happen is your fight or flight, your Goring Blade under that fight or flight is going to, your refresh is going to happen at a point in time where the boss is going to be teleporting. And I wonder and I haven't played Paladin myself on 04, and I'll be interested to talk more about this. Is like a very recent topic that I was looking at the other night. I question if it's not better to open with Fight or Flight on Neo X-Death, or just to open with Fight or Flight in general because of this. Especially because of the Holy Spirit nerf, your Requiescat windows are a little bit weaker now. I haven't done the math yet, but I definitely encourage Paladins to monitor their Goring Blade uptime. That's really what I want you guys to take away from this, is be mindful of where your fight or flight windows are placing your two buffed Goring Blades, and be mindful about the phasing of a boss and how your Goring Blades are interacting, how your buffed Goring Blade uptimes are interacting with that phasing. That's really what I'm trying to communicate. And choose your fight or flight window timings and placements versus your Requiescat timings. Choose your window timings based on that, I feel, and also based on the fact of your Requiescat not allowing you to move very much. Those are the two biggest things I can give advice for the Paladin buff windows. And really, I think the biggest red flags to me come on 03 and 04, specifically Neo X-Death, where 03 you're dealing with the fact that due to RNG you can potentially get stunned on the Spellblade Holy opening, and in Neo X-Death you have the opening where he's just kind of teleporting around the map. Anything else regarding that? No, I think that's probably all I want to say for that. I think in a progressions, like just alluding to what I said at the beginning of the video, in a progression environment, I'm still favoring Dark Knight Paladin just because of the fact that they bring so much more utility compared to Warrior. Warrior brings a ton of self-mitigation versus physical bosses, so if you see an entirely physical boss that just does massive amounts of physical damage at highly frequent rates, I think that a Warrior's strengths skyrocket. But I think when it came to Deltascape progression, Paladin Dark Knight was the clear winner there. And if we see a tier similar to Deltascape in terms of magic damage, I don't anticipate that changing very much in 4.2, unless we see some additional changes to the tanks, and we very well might. We might see. There's nothing that says they can't buff or nerf the tanks even more so than they have. And I'm actually, we are anticipating the Shake It Off changes that they're doing in 4.1, and that may change things up. If they make Shake It Off into something as strong as they could potentially make it. You know, if it affects certain things that it currently doesn't affect, or if they just completely redesign it to be a stronger ability in its entirety, that alone could change the where Warrior falls in the spectrum. So we'll have to we'll take a wait and see approach for that. In terms of damage, Warrior, definitely be looking at Warrior for farm and speed kills, though I think that there's going to be a lot of strengths there, and I'm looking forward to playing it more when I get the axe. So I think I sort of covered everything that I would kind of want to talk about, you know, 5 weeks into the tier. I sort of apologize to maybe some of the viewers here that might have been expecting a bit more of an organized showing. I kind of just wanted to have a bit more relaxed discussion for this video than maybe my I had a very like rigid outline for my previous video, and I just kind of wanted to do it this way tonight. So I hope that this was enjoyable for people, for you guys listening, and I hope that it's useful as well for maybe some give you guys some insight that maybe you didn't have, or you just wanted reassurance on. I'll continue to be doing these. I think that the tanking game is going to be evolving for the next couple months. Even I don't think that we have everything figured out. I don't think that even a class as simple as Paladin is even being played optimally yet. I think that there's room for improvement on all three roles, all three jobs, and it'll be pretty cool to see where the classes end up in 4.2 and 4.4. And you know, Square Enix could have a big hand in that as well with nerfs and buffs. So I think that I'm going to wrap things up here, but I really appreciate you guys taking the time to not only watch this video or skim through it if you're just looking for a specific job, but also I just thank you guys for supporting myself and the channel, and just helping me you know, continue to be able to stream the content that I do, and you guys wanting to help me be able to stream the content I do. That means a lot to me, and I just want to continue to say I appreciate it every time I do this, and anytime you guys pop up on the stream, you know, I'll just remind you how much I appreciate it. So hopefully you don't get tired of hearing me say it. But I'm gonna wrap it up here. I hope you guys enjoyed, like I said, and like I'm trying to do this once a month, so you can expect around a similar time frame of around mid-September to be seeing my next one of these, and we'll see where things lie then. You know, things could be completely different from this video. I know that things are completely different from the last video I made, so it'll be fun. But you guys take care, and thanks for watching.